Hello, pattern readers. I'm so excited to be breaking down and discussing episode 103 of The Wheel of Time with you. The episodes keep getting better and better, so this was my favorite of the first three. A reminder that most of this video will be safe to watch as long as you've seen the first three episodes of season 1, regardless of whether you have read the books or not. I will save book spoilers for the end of the video, and I'll warn you when we get to that point. What can you say about this cold open except to talk about the epic levels of awesomeness that it contains? I loved everything about it. It was the best one so far. They ended the second episode with the reveal that Nynaeve was not only alive, but well enough to track a warder, land Mandragoran, all the way to shatter Logan and then sneak up on him. So it makes sense to start the third episode with how she survived. Running from a Trolloc, luring it into her sacred space, and then killing it with its own blade. The audience ought to be getting an idea by now that you don't want to F with Nynaeve Almira. The first scene after the credit sequence with Nynaeve and Lan contains my favorite line so far, and there's no shortage. Nynaeve starts with the upper hand, demanding to know where her friends are and why Moiraine would leave them. Lan tells her he left them, not Moiraine, and pivots as quickly as he can into Moraine's condition. Moiraine is the best chance to find and help her friends, and Moiraine desperately needs healing. Lan may not know it, but he is talking to two things that Nynaeve really cares about the most. She wants to help the people that she loves at any cost, and she can't really help herself wanting to heal people. It's just in her nature. But she's stubborn. She's not about to give in so easily. Lan thinks she won't actually hurt him and moves to disarm her, and she surprises him by actually moving to strike. His line, "Ooh, you actually tried to kill me," as he disarms her. I'm just going to say it. That line, Daniel Henney's delivery, that was hot and hilarious at the same time. That line is everything. The next scene is Rand and Mat. Rand is calling out recklessly for Egwene and Perrin. Mat has to convince him that anything might be out there to hear him. Mat wants to head home, but Rand surprisingly won't consider it. He knows Egwene believes Moiraine and would head to Tar Valon, so he will go there too. It takes him saying the Two Rivers wouldn't be home without the others to convince Mat to go east. But the scene also contains another banger of a line from Mat. Rand says all roads lead to Tar Valon, and Mat, with perfect delivery, says that's not how roads work. And I'm dead. Perrin and Egwene, making their way across a windy plain, are being followed by wolves. They stop to light a fire, and while Perrin struggles to make a spark with knife and stone, Egwene tries her fledgling power. It's unclear which of these works. Egwene thinks, just as Rand did, that he will be heading home, so that's where she should go. But Perrin is really lovely in this scene, even telling a joke. And then he assures Egwene that Rand won't be heading home. He'll be heading wherever he thinks she will be. And then he embraces her as she rests and tries to get warm. Lan has Nynaeve bound to a tree and gagged. She glares at him, but he gives her some water and asks if she is ready to help. The exchange between them really is on point. Nynaeve saying she's not making a demand, she's making a threat, and then not backing down an inch, turning the whole negotiation around so that she has the upper hand again despite being tied up. The fact that Lan sighs or even shows any sign of not being completely in control is like another man losing his cool. Lan watches Nynaeve intently without saying a word as she gathers what she needs to help Moiraine. Finally, she goads him to speak his mind. He wants to know how she could have tracked him, as he prides himself on stealth. But she doesn't answer, offering a quip and a hint of a smile. Knowing these characters as I do, I can just say that probably everything about Nynaeve is unnerving Lan completely, because I don't think he could have imagined someone with all of her qualities put together. But then Nynaeve speaks with nothing but kindness when she warns Lan that he will feel Moraine's pain through their bond. She seems to be able to tell how worried he is, and her whole tone and demeanor become far more gentle. We then get another dream sequence, and there is a lot happening here. I honestly jumped when I saw the flash of glowing eyes in the window reflection. Even creepier is the flash of Mr. Fire Eyes in place of Perrin for a second. In Perrin's dream, he's at home and can't find Layla. He walks into the forge and finds her body with a wolf biting at her abdomen. A lot of people are using this scene for theory crafting, and I do want to comment on that, but I'm going to save that for my book spoiler discussion. The sort of zombie Layla turns her milky eyes on Perrin, and he hears a whisper of, "I know," before we get a close-up on the glowing-eyed, screaming face. The words "I know" could mean a lot of things, but to me it most likely recalls Layla's words to Perrin after he says, "I love you," in episode 1. Perrin wakes with a yell, and Egwene tells him the wolves are close. They run, and the wolves pursue close behind. Abruptly, the wolves stop, but Perrin and Egwene keep going. Rand and Mat walk through a cold, rocky landscape, and Rand gets a turn to be funny. Mat wants to trade coats, and Rand quips about the stories that will be told about Mat Cawthon, the man who once walked while a little chilly. But they're both wishing for Rand's chunky sweater right about now. They reach a spot that overlooks a quarry, and they can see a small village there. This is Breen's Spring, which they approach. The first sight that greets them, however, is a dead Aiel warrior hung on display in a cage. Mat seems disturbed by it, but also notices a precious stone still hanging on the man's belt. They find an inn and ask the barmaid for any news of Perrin or Egwene. She tells him there's no one new in town except the Gleeman, and then we're treated to a performance by Thom Merrilin, with his gravelly, soulful voice feeling every word of this original song, The Man Who Can't Forget. The room is rapt, but they do not applaud. Perhaps the grim mood of the song, though fitting for the place, can't rouse them. Thom makes his way over to Rand and Mat, ostensibly to ask for a donation, but really to point out that Mat has already let himself be pickpocketed by another man. Though Thom has recovered it, he refuses to return Mat's coin pouch, saying it's a donation for the Gleeman and a fee for the life lesson. Rand and Mat are dismayed, as they already have only enough coin to pay for food. But Thom grins and walks away. There's a big contrast here between the more hardened, world-weary Thom and the naive farm boys. Back to Egwene and Perrin, we see that the wolves are still following, but they're not chasing, they're at a distance. And then they come upon some fresh wagon tracks. Perrin considers whether they might belong to traders or even white cloaks. Egwene thinks that the wolves led them to these tracks. They decide to follow, but at a distance until they know who they belong to. Mat is worried about the loss of money. Rand seems more flippant about it. He leads Mat to Dana, the barmaid, to inquire about a place to sleep for the night. They both try their charm, but Rand seems to work a little bit better, and she takes him up on his offer to do some work, leads him to a pile of logs to split. As Dana walks away, Mat eyes her, and Rand teases him about usually preferring someone Moiraine's age. Rand suggests they take turns referring to the work, but Mat, never missing a quip, says, "Do you think she's up for it?" Pretty much lost it again. But good feelings are gone quickly as Rand and Mat get into a fight. It starts with Mat acting like we haven't seen him before. He blames Rand for them being in this crap town and goes on saying Perrin and Egwene are probably dead. Egwene wouldn't go to Tar Valon for Rand anyway. Rand fires back, calling Mat a prick and telling him to do whatever he wants, as he always does. I think what we're seeing here is that there's two longtime friends and they both know how to hurt each other. What Mat says about Egwene is not really fair. We saw the way she reacted to their separation, the same way that Rand did, wanting to go wherever she thought he would go. But also what Rand says about Mat is not fair. We've also seen from him that he doesn't just do whatever he wants. He thinks about his sisters and his friends. So that's why, even though Mat is understandably downcast about their dire financial situation, what we see from him here is unlike anything we've seen from him before. Mat then goes back to Dana, trying to both charm her and get some other kind of work for himself apart from Rand. But he miscalculates when he tries to brag about being a wealthy horse trader back home, and Dana openly mocks him. It's pretty clear that Mat is dealing with a pretty fragile ego at the moment, but he does end up serving drinks for her. The villagers join in on the mocking, but discover that Mat is more than capable of parrying quips. Mat seems to get a little further with Dana when he drops the act, aside from lying about being from Baerlon. She opens up about hating this poor, tiny village she's spent her whole life in and that everyone knows her. Mat is given something to think about in Dana's idea about going somewhere where no one knows the dirt that you were born in. But he also says that he has people who are counting on him, and so he will get home whether he has to beg, borrow, or steal to do it. Back to Nynaeve and Lan. Moiraine's condition has not changed, and it seems like Nynaeve is actually starting to worry about her. Lan prepares to ride off, leaving Moiraine with Nynaeve. And even though Nynaeve warns him not to be so sure she'll take care of Moiraine, it's also pretty clear that Lan now realizes he doesn't need to be worried about Nynaeve. As Perrin and Egwene follow the tracks, they near a foggy place where they won't be able to see far. Perrin wants to check that it's safe and then come back for Egwene. Egwene understands what is going on. With compassion, she tells Perrin he doesn't have to protect her, and it's not his fault. Perrin quietly says, near tears, "It is." Egwene embraces him, telling him again it's not his fault, as Perrin cries quietly. This is the closest he has come to opening up since Layla's death. but they keep on walking together, and they soon find themselves approached ahead and behind by a group of people asking if they know the song. Perrin and Egwene both have knives drawn, but a young man comes forward and kindly tells them the ritualized answer to the question they've been asked. He nods in encouragement, and they repeat it. He nods to a woman named Isla, who closes the ritual and introduces her husband, Rand. They take Perrin and Egwene to their fires, wrap them in blankets, give them bowls of stew and bread. Egwene and Perrin do not recognize these people, and they must introduce themselves as the Tuatha'an, or the traveling people, also called Tinkers, with an ill-earned reputation for stealing gold and children. Isla tells them they are welcome to stay as long as they need, and the young man, Aram, charmingly remarks that they look like they need it. Dana approaches Rand and tells him he's done enough. She shows Rand to a cozy, quiet shed with 2 beds, suggesting that he and Mat will have the privacy to sort out their relationship woes. Rand seems amused and jokes that if he wanted a man, he could do better than Mat. Rand offers Dana the beer she brought for Mat, since Mat hasn't been seen for an hour. We cut to Lan, scouting, and he has spotted some red tents. Now that he knows where to bring Moiraine, he heads back to Nynaeve. Nynaeve is tending Moiraine's wound, and we hear Moiraine whisper in her sleep, "Swan." Lan returns and asks Nynaeve if Moiraine is able to ride. So Moiraine's eyes flicker open, and Nynaeve says the poultice she's given her will give her some energy for a few hours. Mat has wandered back to the dead Aiel, eyeing the gem. A man who pulls a knife from his sleeve walks up to him, and Mat pulls a dagger. But it is only Thom Merrilin, there to bury the dead man. As we get a closer look at the dagger Mat holds, we can see it has a ruby on the hilt, the one he found in Shadar Logoth. But Mat has let slip that he has survived Trollocs, and this piques Thom's interest. Thom also knows that Mat is from the 2 rivers, saying it's in his speech and his dress and his asinine attitude, stubborn as a mule. Thom cuts the dead body down and explains why he was there. This man was murdered by cowards who feared and did not understand him. The man had been no threat. He was not wearing his veil. He also mentions the man's red hair is rare to see outside of the Aiel waste. Thom asks Mat again what he's doing there, and Mat admits he thought to rob from the man, since he no longer had need of it. Thom understands being in a desperate moment and turns his back to allow Mat to take what he needs. Mat takes the gemstone and a small stone dog figurine and says, "I'm sorry, I've got sisters who need me." Thom tells Mat to help him bury the man. Rand and Dana are talking, and they seem to be getting on very well. She opens up to him as well about wanting to see the world. She says the wheel has not given her many choices. And Rand, leaning in, says he never really thought about the wheel so much. He just always did what he thought was right, only now he doesn't know what's right anymore. He gives Dana a smile, and she leans in for a kiss, but he pulls away. In the awkward moment that follows, she locks the door and then says a line that made my hair stand up. Was it the hair? I shouldn't have braided it. Makes me look too much like her, doesn't it? Rand is alarmed, and especially when Dana says Egwene's name. There's a struggle, and Dana ends up with Rand's sword, holding it on him and looking out the window for Mat, while Rand tries to break his way out of the door. Mat and Thom finish burying the Aielman, and Thom wishes that his soul finds water and shade. They introduce themselves, and Mat asks, now that they're acquaintances, if Thom will give him his money back. Thom reaches for the pouch with a smile and discovers that Mat has already lifted it back from him. Thom wishes him well and walks away. Rand is pounding on the door and yelling for help, but Dana tells him the door is made of ironwood and no one will hear him, and 3 men couldn't break it down. But Rand finds that he is able to break through and runs. He finds Mat, and though confused, Mat runs with him while Dana chases with Rand's sword. When Dana has them cornered, it all comes out. She dreams of 5 of them, suggesting that maybe Nynaeve is also in the Shadow's sights. She knows one of them is the dragon, and she wants to bring the dragon to the Dark One, like Ishamael did 3,000 years before. She wants the dragon to break the wheel and end the cycle of misery that she has seen her entire life. And she has called a fade. At this moment, a blade pierces her throat. Thom Merrilin has heard and didn't hesitate to kill a darkfriend. He tells them they need to leave now. Rand doesn't want to go anywhere with Thom, but Mat convinces Rand, who recovers his sword and follows. Back to Moiraine, and Lan has brought them to the Aes Sedai he spotted. A red sister named Liandrin, who we saw tracking a man who can channel in the first episode, approaches them, and she recognizes Moiraine. She tells them with arrogance that they have captured a man calling himself the Dragon Reborn. And we end with Moiraine staring intently at a man in a cage as it approaches. The man, Logan, returns her gaze undaunted. There were so many things to love in this episode. Nynaeve and Lan scenes were a standout for me. It was a great episode for Perrin. It's a stellar introduction to Thom Merrilin. And Dana, what a show stealer she was. She legitimately had me fooled for most of the episode, thinking that she wasn't going to be a darkfriend, even though I had suspected she would be going into the episode. And so I was still legitimately shocked by that reveal, which was played so well. Before that, I enjoyed the way that she got Rand to open up a little bit. And I really liked their decision to make this new darkfriend character for this episode, rather than choosing one of the few less developed ones from this point in the books. And it's interesting that they made her be a true believer, not someone who was in it for glory or immortality. And the actress really knocked it out of the park, her eyes making the scenes all the more memorable. I guess my only small complaint with this episode was the decision to have Moiraine incapacitated did rob us of an episode of Rosamund Pike, but it is good to see that the other characters can shine when Moiraine is sidelined temporarily. And the decision also did give us these really stellar Lan and Nynaeve scenes, so I can't really wish they'd done differently. And I think it did serve its purpose in giving a reason why the group ended up in Shadar Logoth in episode 2, and also a reason why they end up where they do at the end of this episode, meeting the other Aes Sedai who are with Logan. Now, I am going to cover some book-to-screen changes, some Easter eggs, and foreshadowing for book fans. So, if you haven't read through The Dragon Reborn and New Spring, you will find some smaller spoilers for those books in the rest of this video, as well as major spoilers for The Eye of the World and The Great Hunt. You've been warned. As Nynaeve bursts out of the pool, the blood of the Trolloc has formed the shape of the dragon's fang. This is the second time the show has included this imagery, and in connection to Shadow Spawn. I also think that Nynaeve is serving as the counterbalance of the flame of Tar Valon in this shot. Let's talk about the Layla dream. For those who subscribe to the darkfriend theory, this is the second major piece of evidence. As we know, wolves hate anything to do with the shadow, and so that could be why one is eating her body here. A counter-argument, and one that I personally think is more likely, is that Perrin is seeing the wolf as himself in this instance, and so it's more a manifestation of his own guilt and trauma. Perrin sees himself, the wolf, harming Layla in the same place that Perrin actually did. Did you notice that the inn in Breen Spring is called the Four Kings Inn? Now for Thom. First of all, that song was really emotional. And we know, because showrunner Rafe Judkins said so, that the song was written to be about the Dragon Reborn, but in a spoiler-free way. It makes for some really excellent foreshadowing to hear some of the words of this song over Rand's face as he's listening to it. I also want to address some of the changes to Thom. Part of me does miss the more flamboyant Thom with the colorful cloak, though I can appreciate the grittier Thom with the colors on the inside of his coat. One thing I will say is that I do think a flamboyant Thom would not really fit in so well in this setting of Breen Spring among the downtrodden. So what we do have here makes far more sense. My biggest moment of pause came when Thom didn't give Mat back his coins. At first I was like, oh, that's too harsh. But by the end of the episode, I was like, no, this is Thom. They have nailed it. Thom, in that scene with Mat, he displayed his world knowledge. His interest in Mat really did make sense given his history with his nephew. And we could see at that point that though he does want to teach these naive farm boys some lessons, it truly was for his own good. I did love the bonding between Mat and Thom as they're talking about the Aielman. And then the other thing about Thom is he is a performer. So I can easily imagine that if we get to see Thom in different settings in the future, that we'll see different variations on him. So that could be really fun. This episode gives us the first real signs of Dagger Mat in the scene where he is nasty to Rand. But the most wonderful difference for me here is that we have seen enough of Mat prior to this that we already kind of know this is out of character for him. And I was still able to really feel for him in other scenes in this episode, even after he had been a jerk. So there's just a lot more layers and nuance to early Mat so far in the show than there was in the book. And thank the light. Another character who is more likable in the show than he was in the book was Aram. And he seems so kind and earnest and really, truly charming. It was a nice surprise. I feel like that comment that Dana made about Matt and Rand being lovers was a sort of nod to book fans, some of whom have commented on the chemistry between these two characters in their travel scenes. And I just liked Rand's casual attitude towards it and his sense of humor, both in that moment and in the episode overall. Also, super subtle was Moiraine whispering Swan's name in her sleep. I honestly would not have been able to tell that's what she said if it were not for subtitles, but it is perhaps a little hint of where the show might be going with their relationship. And then, if you noticed, the Aielman had a little stone dog figurine, which suggests that the Aiel was a stone dog. But thankfully, according to an AMA on Reddit with Rafe Judkins, this was not Gaul. And wow, that moment when Dana reveals herself by saying she shouldn't have braided her hair like Egwene, I honestly thought for a moment that she might be Lanfear. And I loved it. It was such a great reveal. Actually gave me goosebumps. There were quite a bit more book to screen changes in this episode compared to the last one, but it's not surprising that they have condensed Rand and Matt's travel scenes as much as they have. Rafe Judkins had warned us about this because of the impracticality of creating so many different set locations. But I really like what we did get of them in this episode. Going into this season, I was actually a little bit sad about the idea of not meeting Thom until episode 3. But seeing what they've done here, I can't really argue with it. He really would have been lost in the shuffle in episode 1, so that wouldn't have been a good choice. This really does work better than that. I'm also totally okay with not seeing Elias. I think it's working really well to have the wolves be more of a mystery at this point, and that just couldn't happen if Elias had been introduced here. I do miss Bail Domon, but I totally understand that. And I haven't completely given up hope on seeing him until after I see episode 5. In terms of the feel of the scenes, I think having Moiraine be injured has actually had the biggest impact in this episode. But as I talked about before, I get the reasons for that as well. And we got some really great scenes in their place. What were your favorite moments and characters from this episode? Is it just me, or are there so many memorable lines already? And what are your thoughts on the book to screen changes so far? Leave me all your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and like and share the video. And until next time, keep those loins girded, my friends.